very welcome here tonight. Can you all hear me, yes? Okay. If any problem, please just ask me to speak up. Don't normally have that problem. Arthur Laxton was coming in this evening, chap tripped and fell. All the books came down on his head. Here, just like coming into the library. He asked me would I go to court as a witness for him. I told him I would not because I said he'd only eat himself. The always the best. I'm just trying to warm them up here. Okay. Anyway, folks, fáilte chuig leabhar an Cunta here in Towlock, okay? Very, very welcome here this evening. One or two little announcements. Phones, if you just put them on side over here. Now, Mícheál is, some of you may know, from Kilmainham Gaol, okay? Yeah. Well, he got out lately there on a temporary release, okay? There's no such thing as life imprisonment anymore. So without further ado, I'll leave Mícheál take the floor there. Dublin Castle, Mícheál.
Okay, so Gurmian Magat. Anna is an very show Nux, Agus is more than an northern very kind live. Thank you very much. Delighted to be here, and it is indeed an honour for me to be able to talk to you about my hero in Irish history. I've been speaking about it for many, many years now, but this is a different slant perhaps. Most people who talk about Anne talk in particular about her time in Kilmainham Gaol and her dreadful sufferings there. And important as they are, that's only a small part of her life. So tonight I'd like to go back a little bit and talk about her connection with Dublin Castle, and in particular the people who were pulling the strings there, the etc. in Dublin Castle. So let's go back to 1922 and tell you that when Michael Collins arrived in 1922 to accept the handover of Dublin Castle, it was the final move in a game of chess that had begun almost 120 years ago, when a stranger began to arrive on a farm in Rathfarnham, County Dublin, and asked to speak to the master of the house. That stranger was dressed as a sailor, and the two children he approached were wary of him when he inquired about Brian Devlin, their father. "We will inquire at this house and say that a sailor is inquiring for Mr. Devlin," one of them answered him as they ran indoors. Now, the children had good reason to be suspicious, for their father, theirs was a family that had seen and suffered much. Their father, Brian, had spent almost 2.5 years in prison on trumped-up charges after the United Irish Rebellion of 1798. And the family had lost much of what it had worked hard to achieve and accumulate over the previous 20+ years. Indeed, the Devlins had been forced to move home to escape the persecution that existed around their home in Wicklow. They were relative newcomers to County Wicklow, the forebears having arrived there from Ardbow in the 16th century. Ardbow, of course, was the ancient lands of the O'Devlins, or Devlins. According to an author, Pat Grimes, Munteravlin is the old name for the lands on the western shores of Lough Neagh, south of the Ballinderry River. In Irish, it was Mícheál Ó Doibhilín, the people of Devlin, or the land where the O'Devlins lived. Indeed, so numerous were the Devlins here that they had to be identified by more than just their names. Pat the Post Devlin, Pat the Fisherman Devlin, Pat the Widower Devlin, etc., etc., according to that great writer Polly Devlin, herself from this area also. This slide shows the ancient area as it was at the beginning of the 17th century. Centrepiece of the area is the High Cross of Ardbow, seen in this painting with St. Colman's ruined abbey in the background. Today, this is a graveyard, where the most common name is still Devlin, a phenomenon we shall see elsewhere shortly. In January 1592, in the depths of winter, Red Hugh O'Donnell had escaped from the Birmingham Tower in Dublin Castle. That escape and the trek into Wicklow is now a legend. Red Hugh O'Donnell, assisted by his ally Hugh O'Neill, 2nd Earl of Tyrone, who arranged his flights from Dublin into the Wicklow Mountains in the depths of winter, successfully reached the stronghold of Fiach Mac Hugh O'Byrne, another of O'Neill's allies, at Glenmalure, where he found refuge. But he had lost both toes to frostbite, and his companion and fellow escapee, Art O'Neill, had died of exposure in the mountains. While recovering in O'Byrne's, it was an O'Devlin who acted as confidential messenger between him and his home territory in Tyrconnell, an act which later saw him forced to migrate from his homeland to Wicklow, bringing with him his sheep and his wives, as my grandfather told me, showing that we Devlins, of course, always had our priorities right. They initially settled in Glenealy, not far from Wicklow town, and the local graveyard today still records many Devlin burials. The earliest Devlin headstones from the late 1700s are now buried beneath the open spaces in the graveyard, identifiable only by bumps in the ground. The Devlins and Burns paths were to cross and intertwine again. Gradually the Devlins spread out to the surrounding townlands. Brian Devlin lived in Rathdrum, where he worked as a house builder with his brothers. It was here that he met Winnie Byrne and married her in 1771. After his marriage, he and his new wife moved to a small farm Brian had rented in Cronbeg, just a couple of miles away, to raise their family. Brian was industrious and raised his growing family to be good Catholics and good workers. They quickly prospered and even rented horses to others in the neighbourhood. Their home was comfortable by the standards of the day and would have looked something like this inside. It was in Cronbeg that Anne Devlin was born in 1780, the Devlins' second daughter. She was the second eldest of 7 children, 4 girls and 3 boys, although I wonder if 2 other children at least had been born, given the normal naming pattern for children at that time. There's no Brian or Winnie in the family, so presumably those children were born and died. I show here a very basic family tree of the Devlins, showing some of Anne's famous cousins: Michael Dwyer, Hugh Vesty Byrne, Arthur Devlin, etc. In the case of Arthur, I've continued his family into Australia. Michael Dwyer and others also had family there. Their descendants traceable to today, but neither space nor time would permit a full family tree here. Many of Anne's Wicklow relatives were to be involved in the United Irish Rebellion of 1798. Notably, Michael Dwyer, Arthur Devlin, Hugh Vesty Byrne, etc. But her immediate family did not take an active part, although they did not shirk from tending wounded rebels who might come to their doors. They were thought so highly of by the landlady, Mrs. Darby, that she gave them her protection against the rampaging yeomen, in return for the Devlins ensuring that none of their relatives would attack the Darbys. Today, the involvement of the Devlins and their relatives in 98 is not forgotten locally, with statues and plaques abounding. By this time, the Devlins, who were prospering, had moved to a larger 40-acre farm in Corballis, nearer Rathdrum, where they continued to do well. I've walked this land with a local historian and an experienced farmer, and they both assured me that this is the finest land. Locally, it was Protestant land, reserved only for Protestants. That the Catholic Devlins were given it shows the high esteem in which they were held locally. Anne was now a young woman, and she took her first job outside the house working in nearby Corballis Castle, working as a kitchen servant for Colonel Manning and his family. However, in the aftermath of the 1798 rebellion, Anne's father, Brian, was arrested and thrown into Wicklow jail on the sworn testimony of a neighbour, Thomas Halpin, later to become a notorious informer and someone we will meet again. Brian was to spend almost 2.5 years in Wicklow jail without trial. As Carr, the head jailer here, refused to give the prisoners any of their due allowances or comforts unless paid by them, Anne visited her father a couple of times a week to bring food and clothing. She carried messages from his family, and Brian gave her instructions on the running of the farm, rehearsing a role she would later play with Robert Emmet. It was at this time that Anne took her first open steps of defiance against the authorities. Her cousin, Michael Dwyer, had refused to surrender after the 98 rebellion and remained a thorn in the side of the British. Anne records visiting him and her cousin Arthur Cale in the Wicklow Mountains, a dangerous trek across mountains on horseback and foot in the dead of night. In February 1799, Dwyer and companions had taken refuge from a snowstorm in Miley Connell's cottages on Hoxie's farm near Baltinglass. Troops surrounded each cottage and set fire to them. Most of the men surrendered, but Dwyer and those with him refused, declaring they would fight to the death. 2 were shot dead and Sam McAllister was wounded in the arm. Knowing he could not escape, Sam bravely took Dwyer's gun along with his own and, standing at the cottage door, drew the soldiers' lethal fire. As he dropped dead and the soldiers were reloading their single-shot weapons, Dwyer escaped as Alistair had planned. Later, the 3 dead were buried by the authorities, 2 in Kilmainham graveyard and Sam McAllister in Leitrim graveyard. Dwyer's sisters, Kathy and Mary, felt he should be with his companions and, as the local men were afraid to do so, they, with Anne and other local women, dug up his body at night and moved him to be beside his comrades. On the way, they were stopped by the yeomen, but defiantly stared them down. When eventually Brian was released as an innocent man, he decided that it would be safer for him and his family to move away from Wicklow, so, having settled his affairs with his landlord, he moved to Rathfarnham in County Dublin, where he farmed the land and re-established his horse rental business. It was to here that Arthur Devlin called early in 1803. He had been hiding in the British Army in the aftermath of the 1798 rebellion on Dwyer's instructions, and had met Robert Emmet as he was returning to Ireland from the continent. Arthur, by this time, was a recruiting officer with the British Army in the south of England, but resigned and returned with Emmet to help him organise his planned rebellion. He arrived in Dublin in 1803 with a group of 48 ex-British soldiers and made his way to Rathfarnham dressed as a sailor to avoid being recognised. Brian Devlin was delighted to meet his nephew again, and they talked about many things, including the state of the country. When Arthur reported back to Robert Emmet, he was able to tell him that he could obtain the Devlin's house as headquarters for Emmet's planned rebellion, but when Robert came to see it, he declared it unsuitable for his purpose. Instead, he looked on nearby Butterfly where he eventually settled on one of these 3 houses. No one knows for sure which house was chosen, but most informed opinion settled on this one. Robert told Arthur that he needed a housekeeper, someone who could manage the household and be trusted. She must, he said, be one in whom we can place implicit confidence in every respect. I know, said Arthur, that my uncle will let one of his daughters come, and you may place 1,000 lives in her hands. At first it was thought that Julia, Anne's eldest sister, would take on this role, but she was too nervous, so Anne volunteered. Once her father and mother had agreed, Anne moved in. Emmet procured some furniture, and Brian Devlin sent a cow, a horse and a cart to give the place the appearance of normal business. Anne now began her duties as housekeeper to Mr. Ellis, the assumed name of Robert Emmet. Anne would later go to great lengths to explain that this was a voluntary, unpaid position. Let me here observe that it is a great mistake to say that I was a hired servant. I did not, nor did my father or mother, in any way stipulate wages. Neither did I ever receive 1 penny as such, nor expect it. Such a thought never was entered by me or by one of my family. My expenses for the time were supplied by my father, she told Luke Cullen. It was in this house that Emmet planned his rebellion, as he met with his most trusted comrades, including Thomas Russell, Jemmy Hope and Michael Dwyer. Anne too was in his inner circle. If I happened to enter the drawing room, Mr. Russell and some of the others would never break off the discourse, even if the most dangerous part of the plans were being discussed. I could easily perceive the smile of confidence with which they honoured me. I often heard them say that Anne is one of ourselves. Among her other duties, Anne acted as courier and mail carrier for Emmet. She frequently visited in his arms dump in Marshalsea Lane, for example, bringing communications from the other leaders. She also carried letters between Robert and his love, Sarah Curran. It was from this house that Emmet set off on the morning of July 23rd, 1803, to go to his Marshalsea Lane depot to make final preparations for his abortive rebellion that evening. It was to this house that he returned, dejected and defeated, with Quigley, Peavy, Wilde, Mann and Stafford before midnight, his rebellion over and all in disarray, to be berated by an angry Anne Devlin. "Oh, what have you done? Bad welcome to you. Have you destroyed the whole kingdom and all belonging to me, you set of cowards? What has become of all your preparations? Are they all gone and lost?" she scolded. Emmet's reply, "Do not blame me, Anne. Had I £1,000, 1,000 men, echoing from his broken heart, was no consolation to her. Fearing for their safety, the men moved to Brian Devlin's house, where they were discovered when a neighbour walked in unexpectedly. She reported what she had seen to the local magistrate, and not long afterwards the house was raided. But too late. Emmet and the others had left for County Wicklow. It was to this house too that a party of yeomen and a magistrate arrived early on the morning of Tuesday, July 26, 1803, with a warrant for the arrest of Mr. Ellis. They searched the house and questioned Anne and her 8-year-old sister Eliza about the whereabouts of Mr. Ellis. Emmet's alias, even half hanging Anne between the shafts of the very cart her father had loaned Emmet, but all to no avail. Anne claiming that she was only Mr. Ellis' maid, and that it was not her business to inquire anything about him or any of his visitors as long as their wages were paid. Thomas Campion described the scene poetically. They came, the bloody yeomen came, and sacked the rooms and doors, and every box and press they burst, they tore the very floors. The bird is flown, where is he, Jade? Where has this rebel ran? How did you answer the red rogues? How could you face them, Anne? I'll tell you. Never a word at all, I said. Some drew their swords, some screwed their shining bayonets on. The yos that fought the boards. Speak, and they stabbed my shoulders through. Speak, and they pierced my neck. I was all wet with my own blood, but no, I would not speak. The yeomen left eventually, frustrated, and Anne and Eliza went to their father's house. Fearing that the soldiers might return, Anne decided to go to Newmarket in the Coombe in Dublin, as her cousin Michael Dwyer's sister was married to John and lived there. They ran a dairy. But Anne had jumped from the frying pan into the fire, for shortly after she arrived on Thursday, July the 28th, soldiers of the Liberty Rangers arrived to search the house for strangers. In the aftermath of Emmet's rebellion, all houses had to exhibit a list of occupants, including visitors. John O'Neill was told, "You know martial law is proclaimed and you should have no strangers in your house." Anne and Mrs. O'Neill were taken to the nearby Coombe guardhouse and kept there for 4 days, but never identified. Anne was questioned by Captain Wilson, and a few shillings and some sewing utensils she carried were taken away from her. Anne admitting later to being secretly amused at the idea of a sewing needle being a treasonable instrument. She said she had been to visit the O'Neills to request a job in their dairy. While in the guardhouse, Anne saw Town Major Sir for the first time. He did not stay unaware of Anne's identity. Anne was told to call to Captain Wilson's address, 8 Castle Street, on her release, which she did, and her money and sewing kit were returned to her. She returned to the O'Neills' home to find several letters that had arrived for her from the leaders of Emmet's rebellion, including one from Emmet himself, requesting that she call to him in Mrs. Palmer's of Harold's. When she did, he gave her a letter for Sarah Curran, which she immediately delivered. Anne's father, Brian, now sent her brother Art to fetch her home, fearing for her safety in Dublin. But on the very night she had arrived home, there was a loud rapping at the front door, and a large party of horse and foot soldiers surrounded their home. When her father opened the door, he and Anne's brother were immediately arrested. The household had been in bed, and now all rushed to get dressed. Anne, her 2 elder sisters, and her 3 brothers, as well as their mother, were now all taken prisoner. The youngest brother, Jimmy, was completely covered with chickenpox, and the soles of his feet so affected that he could hardly walk. His parents pleaded for him to be left behind as they were being taken from the house, but one of the officers said, "The whole of you must come." They all took turns to carry young Jimmy as the whole party now marched into Rathfarnham towards the Yellow House Tavern, where the soldiers knocked up the landlord and demanded drink, pressing some of their captives as well. This pub was where the church now is in Rathfarnham, not where the pub of the same name now stands. Then the drunken soldiers once again took to the road and marched their captives all the way to Dublin Castle, the men clutching their trousers with their bound hands, for they had been slit at the back to prevent them running away. Back in the Devlin house, 8-year-old Eliza still slept on, unaware of what had happened. While in the Yellow House, Winnie Devlin had managed to contact a local woman to go back to her house to look after Eliza. When the party arrived in the castle, Anne saw Town Major Sir and her ex-neighbour and now paid informer Thomas Halpin. This man pointed to Brian Devlin and told Sir he was the greatest rebel in County Wicklow. Young Jimmy was now separated and put in a room on his own, but a short while later Anne was brought to the same room. She was shocked to see Jimmy lying on the bare floor there, wearing nothing now but a woman's coverall. When Anne went to his side, John Hanlon, the tower keeper or jailer, grabbed her by the neck, struck her violently and ordered her not to speak to Jimmy. Anne's mother, father and brother Arthur were all to be questioned. Anne was brought into the record tower, where Town Major Sir came to interrogate her. He started by asking her questions in an apparently careless manner before saying, "You know where those conspirators are. You will have to tell me what you know of them. To save yourself and your family a great deal of trouble, particularly your aged parents." Anne remained silent for some time, then answered, "I know nothing about them. I had to earn my bread and had enough to do to mind my own business." After some more questions, Sir and Hanlon left, and the next morning Anne was brought down to the offices of Under Secretary Marsden for a formal questioning. In the room also was Chief Secretary Wickham. Anne was questioned but gave non-committal answers. They were quite displeased, or rather greatly disappointed, for as they asked me a question they looked into the book that lay before them. Mr. Marsden now lectured me on the sufferings of prison life, pointing at the ignominy of a shameful existence and the suffering and disgrace of aged parents. And again he turned those questions and often about Mr. Russell. Not getting answers to please them, Mr. Marsden seemed very angry, and with some bitterness said, "You are a most incorrigible girl, dead to all the kindness and noble feelings that adorn the character of a woman." I said something in a low tone. I think it was the word informer, but not meant for them to hear it. Marsden turned quickly and stared at me. "Did you hear that, sir?" said he to Mr. Wickham. They walked out, and Hanlon, the tower keeper, again took me in care. John Fleming, who had been stableman of the White Bull Inn in Thomas Street, was now brought into the tower, and Anne was sent to another room while he was put into the room she was taken from. Anne was now put into a little closet in the room that Fleming was in. He never lay down or slept the whole night, nor did she. He paced his room all night, but Anne's was so small she could only make about 3 short steps in it. She could hear Fleming. He seemed anguished, and she comforted him had he spoken to her. She was unaware that at this time that he had turned informer. I took care not to speak to him first, but had he spoken to me I would have entered into some conversation with him that might have led to the detection of others. I afterwards thanked God sincerely that my imprudent desire had no ill effect. The next morning, Hanlon took Anne out to the yard, ostensibly for some fresh air. He also brought out a Newry woman suspected of harbouring some of Emmet's co-conspirators. This saunter was to take me in front of a window where Major Sir and Fleming were standing, so that Fleming might have a perfect view of me. I observed a beautiful pair of ponies, appeared merry, saying to my fellow prisoner that I would like to get an airing on one of them. Attracted to their beauty, I turned my head to look at them. The stern and bullying voice of Hanlon with his vulgar phrase of "Move on out of that," startled me. "Turn round like the other woman," he bawled. I raised my head a little and perceived the Major and Fleming inside the window gazing intently at me. "Yes," I said in reply to Hanlon, "that I may be the better seen." I curtsied to Sir and Fleming, not, I might add, out of respect, and said to my keeper, "I am sufficiently viewed now. I suppose I may go. There's no more necessity for fresh air." As Anne was returned to the tower, she met Hanlon's wife, who asked her where he was. Anne told her that he was up at the stables with the other woman, not knowing anything of Hanlon's reputation as a womanizer at the time. Hanlon quickly turned back, and Mrs. Hanlon made some reference to the other woman. Hanlon immediately struck her, knocking her down. Then Hanlon took Anne to Sir's room, where she was left alone with Fleming, whom she pretended to recognise. Sir came into the room and asked Anne if she knew Fleming. "I do not," Anne replied, even though she knew him well, as she had seen him often in the tavern where he worked as she went through it to Emmet's depot in Marshalsea Lane behind it. Despite Sir Fleming's best efforts, Anne refused to admit to knowing him and eventually attacked Fleming, accusing him of trying to falsely swear her life away. In panic, Sir called for assistance from Hanlon and others and ordered Anne to be taken away. A few days later, Dr. Edward Trevor, medical inspector of Kilmainham Gaol, arrived. He told Anne that most of the conspirators were then in prison, that they were now growing wise and would be telling all they knew to save their lives. Several of them have promised to make disclosures of the whole plot, he added. But Anne continued to deny all knowledge of the rebellion or those who took part in it. This was her first meeting with the man who was to dominate so much of her life. Mrs. Hanlon visited Anne that evening when her husband was away on duty with Town Major Sir. She brought Anne some good food and spoke kindly with her. The next day, Anne was brought before Sir again. "If you be a good girl," he said, "and will give me what information you can about Mr. Ellis and Associates, you need not mention one word about your own relations. They shall not be injured. All we want to know is what place the conspirators went after Butterfield Lane. I will obtain £500 for you, which will be a very fine fortune for a young woman, and only to tell us about the persons who caused so much mischief. They don't care about the poor people they deluded. Mind, you need not mention anything about your own connections." "I know nothing about them, sir," Anne replied. Surprised at her refusal of as much money as she could hope to earn for the rest of her life, Sir now repeated to Anne what she had said to Emmet when he had returned after the failed rebellion, and feared there was an informer among them. Sir then left her. Now the Devlins were removed to Kilmainham Gaol. On August 30, my two sisters, Julia and Mary, were transmitted from the castle to Kilmainham on Sir's warrant for high treason. On September the 3rd, I had the honour of entering Kilmainham, and my passport to it was Sir's warrant for high treason and treasonable practices. I was doomed to remain there for many a long and weary month, and my number on the book of committals of that prison was the ominous 98. On September 3, also my father and mother were transmitted on a similar warrant by the same individual. As to the juvenile conspirators, my brother of 9 years and ill with the smallpox, it appears they were ashamed to formally commit him, but as Dr. Trevor would say, he was humanely allowed to go to prison with his father and mother. In a day or two, I learned that my whole family was as obedient and incorrigible at the castle as myself. We see here a part of the register of Kilmainham Gaol with the names of Anne, her parents, Brian and Winnie, her sisters Mary, Julia, or Judith as it says there, and Robert Emmet. Barely 2 weeks after Anne entered Kilmainham, brutal John Hanlon was dead, shot in the eye by Henry Howley while resisting arrest by Sir and Hanlon. Now Dr. Trevor took Anne in hand. At first he was solicitous, advising her and telling her what he claimed the other prisoners were doing. But all he really wanted was information. When she would not give in, she was thrown into a punishment cell in the dungeons. Trevor was in the pay of the Secret Service, receiving several sums of money annually, including later a pension of £400 per year for foiling a plot to free Emmet, and £92 a year for spying on the prisoners. He tried to trick Anne into identifying Emmet in the exercise yard of the jail and was watching her from within. But Anne had fortunately seen him as she was being brought out, and managed to let Emmet know they were being watched. Nevertheless, Emmet managed to whisper to her, "Anne, dear, confess what you know of me, and obtain your own and family's release." "I thought," Anne whispered back, "you would be the last man in the world who would encourage me to be an informer." "I don't mean that," Emmet answered. "Tell of no one but me. I am a dead man, although here. There will be enough to swear against me. I cannot die easy while you and your family are in danger through my means." Anne replied that she would not swear one syllable for thousands, not for the whole world, against it. Then they parted and never saw one another again. Robert Emmet was hanged and beheaded by Thomas Galvin in front of St Catherine's Church, Thomas Street, on the 20th of September 1803 at 4 p.m, buried the next day in Bully's Acre, a pauper's graveyard. On the 21st of September, Anne was taken by coach to Dublin Castle to be questioned again. On the way, the coach stopped at the execution site, and Anne was horrified to see the dogs and pigs licking Emmet's blood from the roadway. Then she was driven on to the castle and brought into the Birmingham Tower, where she was questioned again by Mr. Morrison. This time he was looking for information on Thomas Russell, Thomas Clooney and others, but again to no avail. Eventually Anne was returned to Kilmainham Gaol. Her troubles there have been told often before. Brother Luke Cullen and Dr. R.R. Madden have recorded how she suffered dreadfully at the hands of vicious, greedy Dr. Edward Trevor. She had information that was worth a fortune to him, and he was determined to get it from her. Now, he was not allowed to physically torture her. He was a woman, but he could and did use psychological torture. Anne was kept in the dungeons of the jail in a tiny cell too small to walk across, without light or even a bed, just straw on the cobbled floor to sleep on. The floor of her cell was frequently covered with up to 150 millimetres, 6 inches of effluent, seeping in from the corridor and the holding cells further down it. Now her health began to deteriorate. She developed erysipelas, a frequently streptococcal infection that one can develop through a cut in unhygienic living conditions, such as the virtual sewer she was now kept in. As this slide shows, some of the symptoms include bloating of one's body, pus-filled blisters all over it, and as if one was on fire. At the time there was no known cure, and even if one survived, it frequently returned and incapacitated. Today it can be treated, though not very successfully, with penicillin. Trevor was terrified that Anne would die without revealing her valuable information, and on one occasion he called in a real doctor to help her. Her legs were swollen with the effects of her erysipelas, and this doctor sliced open her inner thighs with a scalpel to release the pressure, and left her in her filthy dungeon. Jimmy, Anne's little brother, was too ill by this stage and sent to stay with Anne, who was now in the pestilential old Kilmainham Gaol. Here he died of typhus, or jail fever, in her arms. Anne was moved back to New Kilmainham Gaol. But at last, Anne got lucky. The British Prime Minister, William Pitt, died at the beginning of 1806. The new government, which followed, reinstated the Habeas Corpus Act and requested a list of all state prisoners in Kilmainham Gaol with a view to releasing them. Fearing she would escape his clutches and he would not be able to get his valuable information from her, Trevor kidnapped Anne, moving her to Dublin Castle so that she would not be on any list of prisoners in Kilmainham Gaol. Anne was back in the Record Tower in a tiny room. She called it a closet, the length of her bed and about 2 feet wider. The next day, the new government began to order the release of the state prisoners. Anne's father was now released. Her mother and sisters had been released earlier, almost a year before, in an attempt to get Michael Dwyer to surrender. Now the widowed Mrs. Hamlin took up Anne's cause and approached Mr. Long, the new Chief Secretary. She wrote to him to no avail. She received a standard reply to the effect that he was too busy to investigate. Hamlin now pestered him, writing letter after letter. He replied that the facts could not be as she represented them. No government, he said, could keep a person, especially a woman, for so long in such conditions without a specific charge against her. But Widow Hamlin replied the opposite was true. Delicacy forbade her from stating the full facts. Eventually Mr. Long sent for the widow and asked her to show him where Anne was being held. One look was all he needed. Anne was almost unable to move, lying in dirt and filth on a rotten mattress, grossly swollen by erysipelas. He wrote a release immediately. Now Mrs. Hamlin took Anne to her own quarters and helped her clean herself. Then she hired a coach and sent her own sister and brother to take Anne home. The long confinement had taken its toll on Anne's family. Her parents died before long, as did her 2 sisters and her brother Art. But Anne was a fighter. She got a job at Mrs. Elizabeth Fisher Hammond, whose family had been friendly with the Emmets as a lady's companion. an ideal position to allow her to recuperate and gain her strength. While there, Mrs. Hammond had Anne's miniature portrait painted by the miniaturist Anne Linden of Jervis Street, early in 1809. All was looking well for Anne at last, but the following year the aged Mrs. Hammond died and Anne was alone and unemployed. This undoubtedly explains why, the next year, 1811, we find her marrying William Campbell in St. Catherine's Church in Meath Street on April the 17th. The Campbells, like the Hammonds, were friends of the Emmets, and it is likely that this was an arranged marriage. Anne was 31 years of age, William 13 years older. Anne now moved to live with her new husband, and this fact presents us with a unique look into her life, for about this time the police, who had been following Anne since her release on the orders of Town Major Sir and Edward Trevor, lost her. This is easily explained if one considers that Anne's marriage was arranged rather than a regular courtship. Without warning, she moved house to where? The police did not know and needed to find out. So Peace Officer Scott was given the job of following her for a day to find out where she lived. This is what he discovered. P.O. Scott reports that he went according to your orders and followed the woman shown to me in Dr. Todrick's house, to Dr. Todrick's house, number 18 Frederick Street South. Now, Dr. George Francis Todrick had been appointed consulting surgeon to the Meath Hospital in 1809. He also had rooms for his private practice in Grafton Street, remaining there until his move to 18 South Frederick Street in 1811, the year Anne visited him. He later left Ireland for good in 1822. P.O. Scott continues, and from that to a store in Smock Alley, and that she had a conversation with two labouring men of said storehouse, and from that to number 1 Mullinahack, and from that to the Meath Hospital in the Liberty. Now, one might wonder why Anne did not attend Dr. Todrick at his free clinic in the Meath Hospital. Perhaps when you see the nurses, you might understand her reluctance to go there. And these women would have known Anne. They would have been there when she was a patient. And from that, she went back to the said number 1, and from that to the Royal Mail Coach Hotel in Capel Street, and from that to the Egg Market office in Mary Lane, and from that to the Brazen Head Inn in Bridge Street. And from that she returned to number 1 Mullinahack, which I really believe to be her residence from the freedom she made with some of the neighbours in said Mullinahack. John Scott, Peace Officer. So it is clear from that Peace Officer Scott was delegated to find out where Anne now lived. But he was wrong. He'd made a mistake. For Anne did not live in Mullinahack. Let's look at what actually happened. Yes, Anne did walk into number 1 Mullinahack, and she knew the neighbours well. She was a well-known chatterbox, especially in her earlier days. But she didn't stay in number 1. She actually walked through the house, out the back, and into the mews at the end of the yard, number 2 John's Lane. This mews had accommodation for Anne and John, her husband, and stabling for his horse, because he was a drayman or a carter. Anne and William now settled down to a comfortable married life. As William had a cart and horse, he could collect and deliver laundry for Anne, who began to work as a laundress from home. Children arrived. First Catherine, 1811. Then John, 1813. William, 1816. And finally Mary Ann in 1822. And Anne at this stage was 42 and William was 55. Anne worked hard and even got a job in St. Patrick's Hospital, where the manager was one Patrick Campbell, a relative perhaps. Certainly she was well paid here, earning £63 per annum, until the Campbells were allowed to retire in 1836 following an inquiry into corruption in the hospital. Anne was now let go, and her replacement got £18 per annum. At some stage, Anne had her silhouette made, popular if relatively cheap portraits at the time. This was to turn up in an auction house in the drawer of a desk in the mid-20th century and is now in the National Museum. But now Anne's life took a turn for the worst. In 1846 her husband died after an illness, leaving her alone. Her eldest son William was weak and ill all his life and there was little support for her. Catherine had married John McGuinness in 1838 and moved out and now had her first baby. Mary Ann had become a drug addict, addicted to the medicines of the day. Sorry. Okay, missing page. We know that Mary Ann in fact went to the United States where she died in a lunatic asylum run by a descendant of Thomas Emmet. As things worsened, Anne eventually had to move house. She moved to number 2 Little Elbow Lane in early 1851. Here she was often seen by her neighbours as she tried to carry on washing laundry. Now on the street, for she could not carry the water upstairs. We don't know what Little Elbow Lane looked like, but descriptions would suggest it looked a little bit like this. She probably in the garret at the top. She was sub-renting from another woman. This is the list from the list taken in the area at the time, and we can see the people who were living in number 2, where Anne was. She's not listed, of course. She was actually dead by this time. But if we look further down, we see John Nail. One wonders if this is her cousin's husband, the man who had run the dairy that she'd moved into at first. Was he now living there, and did he arrange for her to move there? There's also a Nicholas Wills, somebody we would have seen earlier on as best man at her wedding. And Wills, again, was the name of the school teacher in Anne's house, in Anne's, near Rathdrum, where her father went. And one wonders, is that the son of the Wills there? In her later years, Anne had been contacted by historians, Brother Luke Cullen, Ora Madden and John Thomas Campion. And although they were not interested in Anne other than as a conduit to Robert Emmet, they recorded his life story for posterity. Campion penned a poem describing Anne's story, and indeed her storytelling, and I quoted from this poem a little earlier on. Anne's son William, frail all his life, did try to help her with the rent, but was frequently too ill to pay it. It was 1 shilling and 6 time. On September the 17th, 1851, Anne was seen by her landlady nursing him in his garret. The next day, September the 18th, 1851, she died alone, starving, in that miserable garret. She had starved to death because there was no one to help her. The police, who at first had followed her in secret in the hope of catching any of those she was protecting, soon began following her openly, scaring everyone away in an open prison for the rest of her life. They had followed her for 48 years. She was buried in a pauper's coffin in her husband's grave in Glasnevin, a grave she had purchased when he died in 1846. But even in death, Anne was given no peace. 6 months later, the historians R.R. Madden and Luke Cullen, together with some friends and relatives, dug up Anne's body and moved it to another part of the cemetery, thinking she was in a pauper's grave. Anne's first act had been to move Sam McAllister's remains to be with his friends. And now she was moved from her husband's side, her final wish unfulfilled. There she lies today, separated from her husband, beneath the Celtic cross, forgotten by all but a few who mark the anniversary of her death annually with a mass and a visit to her grave. Anne Devlin was dead, but the game was to continue for another 71 years. A game which had seen a pawn challenge not just the king and later the queen, but every other piece on the board, before the castle itself was captured. While Anne did not finish the game, she made the ending possible. This pawn sacrifice and our loyalty over 48 years to the democratic ideals of Robert Emmet ensured that we would have the freedoms we have today on most of this island. Thank you.
And we'll aim Hesht again. Did any questions, folks? Might have more chance of getting them answered here than on Sunday Beach. Any questions, folks?
Say that absolutely stunning, amazing amounts of information. I haven't seen anything like that in a long time. Should be detected. Can I make just one small point that might be of interest to the Gallagher and the society? Robert Emmet actually stayed in John Doyle's house in Ballynease in Talladale after he left Rathfarr, and he moved on then to Miss Martin's house in Belfast. Just very small.
Yeah.
He was there in Talladale, so a lot of the sources say he went to
Yeah, Robert was distraught after the rebellion. He failed, obviously. He failed to finish what he saw as his family's work and his older brother's work. He failed in what he wanted to do, and he let everybody down. He knew that, and he couldn't understand why. I think Robert's big problem was that he was too honest, and he didn't believe that other people would lie to him. Michael Dwyer lied to him. Said he could win with 5,000 men. Michael couldn't win with 550. But he was quite happy to get weapons from Robert. So Robert was wasting money too. And he was, I mean, you think of what he did on the day of the rebellion. He sent off to one of his financiers and asked for £500 for guns. So what do you do on a Saturday afternoon with what, £500 then, probably close on €1 million today? You know, walking around Dublin trying to find someone who'll give you guns. You know, I mean, how did you think it was going to happen? And surprise, surprise, the guy who got the bearer bond or check didn't come back with it for some strange reason. You know, Robert trusted people, and that really was his own downfall. I think as Rowan O'Donnell pointed out in his great biography, two-part biography of Robert, he was that close to success as he saw it, to taking Dublin Castle. If he had actually gone on and attacked Dublin Castle, he would have taken it. The soldiers in Dublin Castle had 1 bullet each. You know, so the first fusillade of shots and they would have had to surrender. He would have taken it. Now, the rebellion still would have failed, but it would have been a longer and a bit more successful. There was nobody rising in the north, there was nobody rising on the south. But there were other people around. I mean, Arthur Devlin and Kilmainham still hadn't done it until the next day. They could have continued it. They could have certainly made a much bigger rebellion than the war.
It's great to find out this information because there's so little emphasis placed on that.
Yeah. There is that lovely statue in Rathfarm. Unfortunately, most people think it's Sarah Clough.
Why did he start an insurrection when 1798, like it wasn't long after?
No, it wasn't long after, but he believed that the feeling was there, that people were frustrated. You just had the active union, so we'd lost, you know, we were not worse off, we'd lost our parliament. He had been, remember, you got to remember where Robert was coming from. He come from a family where debate was the normal thing. He'd sit around the table and he would debate in any of 6 languages the issues of the day. And this is where, you know, his brother was there, his father was there. They were all very fair-minded people. They could all see what was wrong with the country. And they knew the only way to fix it was to remove the administration and start afresh. Emmet's own proclamation for his rebellion is a blueprint for the country, for a very fair and democratic country. And he believed that building on 98, and if he started quickly enough, he could continue that rebellion. He saw that the likes of Dwyer was still out there. He thought the people in Northern Ireland would come with Russell. And he convinced them to quite a degree. Remember, he'd gone to Scotland and he'd gone down to the continent to talk to his brother from Atlas before he went off to the States. And he convinced himself that the people would rise again. His problem was that things had moved on a little bit. Weapons had changed. People weren't willing to go up with pikes against guns as the Kildare told him. And that's why he needed money on the day of the rebellion to get guns for them, because they weren't willing to fight. you know, he didn't know, of course, that Russell was having no success in Northern Ireland, being run out of towns, in fact, as he suggested, starting again. People were weary of this. I mean, a rebellion with 100,000 people in it, what, 30,000 dead, 50,000 arrested. You know, the manpower of the country was gone, and no hope of overseas aid. It just wasn't going to happen. But he convinced himself. He was a dreamer, as all great leaders have to be. And he was an honest man. He believed he had to do it. But unfortunately, there was nobody around who was practical enough to tell him what was going on and that he shouldn't have done it.
The Emmets had to leave the country then, or
They did.
deported out.
Well, Thomas Emmet was deported to, well, he moved to Fort George in Scotland first, and then moved down in 1802 to the continent, where he and the others were deported on agreement that they wouldn't come back. I mean, they were all gentlemen, the word was upon, they weren't going to come back. They had done a deal, but they were arrested in advance of the rebellion in Dublin. They had done a deal, if they gave information to the authorities, they would not be executed or put on trial. So they were held in Kilmainham Gaol as guests. They said information that the state already had. There was nothing new in what they told them. They didn't confirm information the state had. And indeed, they were the first ones to run up against Dr. Trevor. He treated them rather despicably. But they were eventually moved to Fort George in Scotland, where, intriguingly, among the soldiers guarding them was Arthur Devlin, Anne's cousin. And he escorted them down the length of England as they moved out. And then he was promoted to recruiting sergeant. And then he resigned and came back with about 40 men. And he obviously met Robert Emmet as he came back into the country and came back home. Robert himself, of course, wasn't supposed to be the country leader. He was a wanted man too. So, yeah, that's what happened to that. Sure.
Excuse me, how sure are you that it was Galvin who executed Robert Emmet?
Well, he was the hangman from Kilmainham Gaol, and it smacks very much of Galvin. Galvin was a brute. He was, in the worst sense of the word, a butcher. Remember, Emmet was sentenced to be hanged, drawn and quartered. The hangman didn't know how to do it. Forgot to bring the equipment apart from anything else. He hanged him and beheaded him, but he had to borrow a saw and butcher's block from a butcher across the road. And that smacks so much of Galvin, it's untrue. I mean, there's Galvin was at an execution in Tala, a father and son. And I mean, he made, at that stage, a portable gallows, remember, he had to build it, and that darn thing nearly fell on him when he was taking it down to the delight of the crowds. Almost certainly. I know there's another guy who says it was him, but I think that was a deathbed sort of wish for fame. Why would they use somebody else when they were quite willing to do it? Galvin was quite anxious to do it. He would have been very happy to do it, and to get the money, which is what he did it for. You know, I mean, he hanged his own son for a £10 debt. I see absolutely no reason to doubt that it was him. There's nothing other than the other lad's word that it was him, nothing else. Galvin never claimed it, but then Galvin wasn't interested in that. He was only interested in money. He didn't want fame.
Wasn't there an arms factory in Patrick Street?
Yes. I mean, it's probably, again, Rowan O'Donnell suggests that Robert had at least 6 all around Dublin. And I think we've found, 2 of them. There's at least 4 more to be found. Maybe the Lewis will turn them up as it goes through and digs up all these cellars, I don't know. But Rowan reckons that there are several arms dumps still out there. The problem, of course, is that, as you know, they were very good at hiding the stuff, faults, walls, etc. So look into a cellar or a room isn't necessarily going to find the stuff there. You know, you need to strip the walls or be knocking the buildings down, I think, perhaps, to find the stuff. But eventually, hopefully, we can find the rest of what he did there. The problem is, of course, with this decade of commemorations that we moved away from 1798, and we're not looking at that at all. So that money is going into other areas. Nothing wrong with that, but it's not going into those areas. So we're, you know, the search that needs to be done, I think, for the rest of the arms dumps that he had and the munitions factories. I mean, he made everything he was using. He had all these incredible weapons, glass bombs. I mean, one of the things people forget is that Emmet did not, you know, one of the reasons he stopped the rebellion was he saw people being killed. He didn't want anybody killed in his rebellion. This was intended to be a bloodless coup. he was going to do an extremely clever thing, take on the British Army in Dublin City, within the streets of the city, horsemen, who were used to fighting out in the fields in a controlled and very gentlemanly type of battle, where you started at sunup and finished at sundown. He was going to take them on after sundown, in the dark, with rockets, noise, flares, light, blast bombs, sound. That's what he was going to do. He wasn't going to kill anybody, he was just going to scare them. They'd run away. And he'd take over Dublin Castle. And once he had done that, he thought they'd surrender. Dwyer was to come in and wait till he was be surrounded and would be taken. Once that happened, the rest of the country was to rise. None of that happened, of course.
Mícheál, the information that Anne had that was so much wanted all them years
Yeah.
was
50 names. 50 names.
with the names of financiers. wasn't
The
it?
names of the financiers, 50 of the leading businessmen in Dublin. And if you think I mean, how valuable they were, she was offered £500 for the names. The thing is that Tommy to Sir and Dr. Edward Trevor had a deal. Any information that Trevor could give to Sir. Remember, Sir was one of the two chief of police in Dublin. Tommy to Swan was the other one. They could, if that solved a crime, or if it found the proceeds of crime, Sir was the person who decided what the reward was. And he could name the reward. He would split that reward then. The police were entitled to a reward if they solved the crime. So he would then split that reward with Trevor. Trevor, as the medical inspector in a jail like Kilmainham, was in an ideal position to get information from people. He could brutalise them, or he could bribe them to get information. And he was so successful at that when he died, he left, £32,000 in 1837. Arthur Guinness left £17,000. So nearly twice as much as Arthur Guinness. And that's how much he made out of this kind of corruption. Now, the thing is that John Major Sir would have set a reward for each of these men of £500. You look at that, 50. So that's, £25,000. That's what the reward money would be. And that was huge. I mean, an ordinary person, somebody like Anne, if she was earning £15 a year then, was doing very, very well. George Dunn, when he became governor of the jail in 1820, he was earning £100 a year at the time. Later went up to £200. But an ordinary jailer in the jail, an ordinary turnkey would have been earning £25 a year maybe. So that's the kind of money you're looking at. It was huge, huge money. The significance of those people was they did nothing more. We don't know who they were. They vanished. But obviously they believed in what Emmet was trying to do. They believed in a democratic republic. And they obviously taught their children that. And they taught their children that. And they taught their children that. And eventually we had 1916. And we went on from there. And if they had been arrested, they would have been at the very least, destroyed financially. Probably they would have been executed. And that really would have killed that, what I refer to as that spinal cord of nationalism. And that's the significance of it. She kept that alive until we got what we have today. And I actually genuinely believe we owe this country to her. And 48 years of loyalty to Emmet's activities. So she's a huge and significant part of that. She kept everything alive and kept us going. Yes, sir.
Would you think the people that she was covering up, that she was protecting, do you not think that at that stage they would kill her as well?
You couldn't go near her. A little bit as we saw with the general, wasn't it? Being followed by the police, he was the safest man in the country. And he could offer you protection. And Anne was exactly the same. And you've got the other thing about this, about the police following us, the significance of this, 3 separate police forces. I mean, you had the night watch which started, then you went into the first police, then you went into the peelers. And right up to 1851 when I died, 3 different police forces, each one succeeding the other. And yet, the instruction to follow Anne carried on. It was not what it initially came from Trevor, through Sir, but that was for purely personal monetary gain. It was the Secret Service that kept that instruction going. It's the only organisation that could have kept that order going right through. Joseph Plunkett's grandmother knew Anne, and on her Rubicon, all in the blood,
just in the introduction to it, she talks about her going to see Anne, and she talks about the police still following her at that stage. It was dangerous, she said, to be seen near Anne. You were going to be labelled a troublemaker. You could be arrested. So that was right up to the day she died. You know, for 40 odd years. And that has to have been the Secret Service. That's how significant she was. They obviously saw her. Once it was obvious that the others were going to contact her, she was obviously still seen as being a focal point. One who could step trouble or feared that she would down. It seems from Anne's own words she wasn't interested in doing that. But that's a different issue. That's easy to say afterwards.
Successive Irish governments have literally pushed her into the background. They have done nothing to make her up there with the best of them.
The
Like
last
if she
one.
had been a man, it might have been a totally different thing.
Absolutely. The last one to honour her was Devlin, and Sinead unveiled the plaque on Auckland Bridge, which is a strange plaque. It commemorates her work in 1798. She did nothing in 1798. However, that plaque is an interesting mystery. The 1798 committee of Wicklow, I believe, had money left over and they wanted to honour Anne, but they couldn't do it. So they said she did something in 1798. They put a plaque up to her for that because they couldn't honour 1803. Their money was specifically for that. But Sinead Van Devlin went down and unveiled that plaque. Devlin himself talked about her, and he was involved in the ceremony for remembering Glasnevin. Quite interestingly, I mean, Patrick Pearce in the GPO came to the women in the GPO in 1916 and said, let her be a role model for you. But it does seem that fairly quickly she was dropped after that. And no great. I mean, when I was in school, she was mentioned, but only as a periphery to Robert Emmet.
Was she even listed in the names that were on for that famous Hackett Bridge?
Yes, she was one of the names put forward at very early stages. She was in Wicklow indeed 2 years ago. She was named the Wicklow person, greatest Wicklow person of all time. And indeed, in 2003, when the set of stamps was issued for the Emmet Rebellion, it was Robert Emmet, Thomas Russell, and Anne Devlin. And again, you just wonder with this. You had an ordinary postage stamp for ordinary letters. You had a postage stamp for airmail, and then you had a parcel stamp. You know, so you got like sort of a shilling or whatever it was, 10 cents, 20 cents, and a €1 stamp. Nobody's going to see that one. She ended up on the parcel stamp, the one that wasn't going to be seen. So we didn't buy the first time issue cover, we didn't get the stamp, basically. Whereas most of the sets, you get the same image across them, on all of them, you get 3 of each, or whatever, all the same values, so they're equal. We did for the 1916 readers, all the stamps were the same value. But hers was the highest value stamp, which technically, I suppose, is praised, but it just meant it was the least likely to be seen. And it's from for many, many years. Every year on the anniversary, or the Sunday nearest the anniversary of Anne's death, I have a mass in St. Catherine's where she got married and where her children were baptised in Meath Street. Then I go up to Glasnevin and we put some flowers on her grave. I'm not allowed to have a formal meeting there because, according to Glasnevin, I need public liability insurance, etc. And I need their permission to go and do this. It's actually what's happening this year, if it all goes to plan, is I'm giving this talk in Glasnevin on the Sunday before the day. She died on the 18th, which was a Wednesday this year. I think on the 15th or something. It's going to fall between the All-Ireland football and hurling finals. It can't be one of those 2 Sundays. So I'm going to give a talk there and then just go out and put some flowers on the grave there. We have the Mass as in St. Catherine's, midday Mass, earlier on in the day for her. But again, this mural is in the Liberties now, done by Mazer a couple of years ago. He came to Glasnevin, he came to Kilmainham, was on my tour and thought she was an incredible woman, and went off and painted that a couple of years ago during our festival. It's lovely to see it there. And in fact, he wasn't aware it was the only site available to him when he was doing it, but the wall it's on, the street it's on, if you look down, you're seeing St. Nicholas and Myra, which is where Anne's daughter got married. If you look the other way, you're looking up towards
Little Elbow Lane, or what was Little Elbow Lane, where Anne actually lived and died. And if you look down behind, if you go down the side of it here, you're going down towards St. Catherine's, where she got married, her children were baptised. You cross the road, of course, you get John's Way, where she lived for most of her life. And of course, just down to the left of it is where Robert Emmet himself was executed. So it's a fantastic location to have that there. And it's fabulous to have it there, so I'm delighted to have that there as an image for it. Little bits to do now. There is talk, tile films are looking to do opera. However, they can't get a grant. There's no grants for historical documentaries until after 2016, no further grants. But as one can imagine, so many people have applied for the 20 stuff from 1916, etc. So they can't do it without a grant. You don't make money on these things, so they need a grant. But we're working on it. So hopefully, something else.
Shane's wife is a Devlin. Is there some connection there?
There is, well, she's Devlin from our role, she's coming from there. She's related to Polly Devlin. Yeah, she's a sister. And there is a connection, very definitely. Yeah, the Devlins that came from our role, so Anne Devlin, Polly Devlin, Joe Devlin, the great socialist MP, around 1900 and on into the early 20th century, he also was from there. I mean, it's an incredible family. In terms of what they've done. Reputedly, the original Devlin was sword bearer to the last High King of Ireland. Apparently the second highest role John would have in the country, the highest being High King, of course. Something obviously you struggle to get there. And it is often said that that's the name means the Devlin or Divilly.